Okay, so here we are in Gaea 6000, still in early access preview. I thought I'd go through the interface to give a little update on how that's all been put together. So let's start off into the preferences. We're going to go over to the preferences here from this little 3-bar icon. So the general thing is, of course, to check for, let's go to general actually. So to autosave when deleting nodes, building, adding nodes. This is a safety mechanism, of course, built in to save you from accidental crashes. Remember, this is still early access preview, which means it's prone to bugs and major changes. So you want to be able to save those things and not lose your work. This, of course, also covers things like, maybe you get a power loss or something like that. You won't lose most of your work. Color scheme you can play with if you want. It claims that a restart will be required to have some of these effects take place. For the viewport, this is the main thing that people want to mess with, and that is things like the attach main window. So what this means is that when you turn this off, this window that contains your train will pop off and you can maximize it to the other window, while your node graph will appear here, kind of filling the space, and they can be larger, and sometimes it's easier to work. Another feature is when this pops off, the default is set to always be on top. That means any requesters or other windows or stuff like that will never appear in front of that terrain. So if you want those things to appear in front of them, you're of course going to want to turn this off. Your preview resolution, which is also found right here, can be set by default, so when you start off new scenes and stuff like that, it's automatically going to switch to this. Under workflow, we have the graph workflow or the layers workflow. I like to be in the graph workflow, so I've set mine to that, and that's up to you. You can start off with a blank terrain if you do not like this starting off with a mountain and a displaced node. A lot of people do like them, so that's the default. But if you want to have absolutely nothing, you can of course turn this on and that will give you that. This automatically switched to 512 preview when opening files. This is again for your benefit. This is if you have a really large node tree that's been put together that takes a long time to process. As soon as Gaea first opens, it will process that terrain. And if you had previously been working on something, say in a 4K preview before building, because you wanted to make sure everything was okay just before building it out, and then you say, okay, well, I'm going to work on this other train now, and you go and open it, if you were left in a 4K, that could take a long time for it to load, and maybe you got the wrong file. Who knows? So this jumping to 512 means that when it first loads up, it can be a little bit faster. Navigation, alt navigation. This was popularized with Maya in its interface, and of course it's been adopted by a large number of software, and that includes of course Gaea. So that means you hold down the alt key and you use your left mouse button in order to orbit the screen. Your middle mouse button will of course pan, and you also have the wheel for the zoom. Now some people don't like the alt navigation. They're maybe not used to it, or they think it's an extra thing that they have to do. I would recommend getting used to making use of that, simply because Erosion Studio, which comes with this version of Gaea, when you click on the terrain, it actually starts to sculpt it using the erosion tools. And if you hold down Alt, of course, you're orbiting the view. So it actually is to your benefit to be using this Alt navigation method so you don't accidentally mess up your terrain as you're moving around. So that's Alt to rotate and the left mouse button. We go to the toolbox. Again, most of the stuff you probably want to keep on the way that it is. This is like show the large pop-up. We're going to see that in a moment, and that is something that I like to use over using the side panel, but both are relevant. The graph, you can change the way that it functions, the way that it looks, so that's up to you. You can play with those to see what they look like. Again, restart is required for those changes to take effect, and you can try those out, see if you like them. If not, you set it back. Output, when you output your final files. This is a central build repository. This is the default location where it's going to build those things. I found in a protected Windows 10 environment, such as I have at the university, things would not build to the desktop or to the documents folders or that kind of stuff, even though I should have access to those. And I can save files to them, but the build itself wouldn't build to those locations. So instead I opted to set my build repository to my D drive, which I had full read and write access to guaranteed, and everything works fine there. So if you do have that issue, maybe you're in a studio or university kind of setting and you're running into that issue where things are not being built, maybe change to a different folder that you have access to. Privacy, we do want to keep these things on. This is, of course, letting you know that there's a new update, which obviously you want to know. And of course, sending the anonymous usage data, information that CloudSpinner needs to continue to improve the software, and especially in this stage where it's still preview software, they definitely need that information. So one other feature, or two other features, I suppose, that we should pay attention to up here that I kind of skipped past is the use bleeding edge engine. You turn that off for compatibility issues with your graphics card. So if you're finding you're having an issue, you can turn that off. When you first start up Gaea, there's going to be an initial kind of a working mode panel that'll pop up upon first usage. They'll ask you how you want to have your experience run, and that option is in there as well. So if you're not sure if it's going to work with your graphics card, you want to set that down, try that out first, and then when you feel a little bit braver, pop it back on. That's something that you can do. And of course the overall quality is here, the Ultra. Also, if you have speed issues, you can downgrade that a bit if you want to. So we're good with that. We're just going to close that down. This is the name of your current file. You have new files, open, save, and then save incremental. There are other options here where you have the option to open recent files, as well as the save as feature. So if you've been working on a file that was under a different name and you made major changes to it, say it was a mountain and now it's kind of a canyon, but you still want that original mountain, you can go ahead and say save as and then change it to canyon instead. So those are options. Also here you have the license feature. So if you're having issues with your license, you need to change to a new one, that's where you can do that. Of course, the build version is up here. And if we go back down, I mentioned already that this is your preview resolution, so just click on that and change to get to a different preview resolution. When you do that, of course, all nodes will be rebuilt automatically, so you'll have to wait for it to finalize those. This is your orbit view, which is the current view that we're using here, which of course with, as I said, Alt navigation, orbits, middle mouse button, you don't actually need Alt for this, and then the wheel. Alternatively, there is the first person view. Now this doesn't need Alt either. If you just hold down the left mouse button, you can kind of pan around, and you can use the first person shooter kind of keys. So you have W, which is forward, S is backwards, we have A to go to the left, D to go to the right, and then we have things like Q, which goes up, and E, which goes down. So you can basically move around in this interface using those keys. Also featured in this is if I tap spacebar, it will teleport to that location, but it always goes into the mesh, and so not my favorite feature, but it's there. So if you needed to jump more quickly, you felt this was a bit sluggish, kind of flying over the terrain, you can just say, you know what, actually I want to be over here, spacebar, and it jumps you to that location. I want to be on top of the mountain. Come on. It's only working for the flat areas. So that's there. And if we switch one more over, we get to the 2D view, which is full on orthographic, but it still shows the shading. I'm going to switch back to the regular orbit view. Next in line, we have this little option here, which is experimental currently. It's undo the last action. It may or may not work all the time, so just be aware of that. We have our materials if you want to change the way the material works. If you've been using a previous version of Gaea, you will have noticed that there were different kinds of materials that had textures for desert terrains, canyons, that kind of thing. Those are gone for the moment and are replaced with these basic ones. And that's primarily because you have the option of texturing these things yourself now, and you may want to change the shading model. For lighting, it's been moved into here, and we have this little button where we can kind of click and drag around. It will change the lighting direction. We also have the sliders so that we can use with that as well, and turning on things like the skybox, which we saw in the first person view. Just turn that off. And we have water, which we can turn on and set the water level up or down, which is pretty cool. Lots of cool little animations in there. Turn that off. And then we have the overall terrain scale plus the contour options. And so contour is supposed to draw little lines up there. I'm not sure which mode you have to be in to see it. I haven't been able to get it to function in this version yet. But moving right along, we have our mutate seeds. And so what this does is when you click it, it's going to give you this thing. Oh my goodness! This will change all of them, and you can't undo it, but however they will auto save your terrain so that you don't lose anything. So if you didn't like the result, it's being saved. Now I do this and nothing's changed. It didn't work. Don't jump the gun. What's happened here is one of two things has to be done in order to see the change. Either A, you have to refresh all of the nodes, so you can force refresh on all nodes, which if it's a big tree, you may not want to do that, or you can simply go ahead and click on any other node and you'll see it will update that. And that's because this screen has been set to not refresh until something has changed. Otherwise it's constantly updating it, and that's just going to eat away at your resources. So it makes a lot of sense for it to not update until you choose something to update with. So that's it. Basically, if you've constructed something and you kind of like the style of it, but you want something different, you can save out that version, then mutate all the seeds, and you'll get a different version of that same kind of thing. So if you made a really cool canyon, and the workflow is geared towards making canyons, then what you'll get is when you do this, you'll get a different kind of canyon. So it's pretty cool. We have the build stack options that are here that we're going to go into kind of last. So skipping along, we have the main options for each one of these nodes. So each one you click on, you'll get a different series of options. And the way these guys work is that for some of them, when you grab the slider, it will update live in the viewport. For other things, if you drag it, nothing will happen until you let go. And for others still, things like, say, Erosion, which I will just connect here, just drag and drop. The Erosion has an apply button, and that's because this is a longer to process tool, and so those things that take much longer to process, you may want to change a number of different features. It's got a lot here that you can of course change, and once you're done changing those, you just simply hit the apply button. Rather than dragging it, it changes it, drag it, it changes it, drag it, it changes it, and it takes a long time to chew through it. So that's why this is here. We also have underneath them an overall influence, so how much of that will be applied. So it's kind of like an opacity of sorts, like you would have, say, in Photoshop, to alter the influence of that particular node. If we go under that still, we have the script editor, which won't be of much usefulness to you in this stage. We have the cancel the process. So again, this may not work at all in all situations, but what it's meant to do is, of course, stop the current process. So if something's taking a long time to process and you want to try and see if you can escape from it, you can click this button and hopefully it will stop that. We also have this voice recognition button, which allows you to call out what kind of things you want it to create. There is a video demo of that being used on, I think, on the Gaea Facebook page. So that's an interesting feature, not one that I use, but it's kind of cool. Moving along, we have the options for this interface in here. So we have some snap features, show and hide grid, show the 2D view, which is also a button here, so we don't really need that. Some snapshot features for taking snapshots. This next button, which is grayed out, is actually a way of taking any kind of connected nodes and creating a combined node for both of them. So we'll combine the two of them together. Just going to throw that away. Just by clicking it and pressing delete. Next option is the 2D view. And so the 2D view is based on what these things have to offer. So if I go to the outputs of certain things, sometimes I have to do it again. You'll see the outputs, and for erosion, if I do this one, you notice I have different outputs. So it's based on what we have here. I have one output here, whereas I have 4 different outputs there. And so I can see these different things. I can see them as red information on top of a shaded mesh, should I desire, so I can see how that all works through. Or I can switch to a pure black and white view. If I switch to the black and white view, I can also view their auto-leveled version of them, where I see like the maximum values of these things, which in some cases not super clear, but it's a feature that you can apply. So here, if I do that, I see the actual height of the mountain, unlike the other outputs. So for height information, it typically goes a little bit darker, and that shows you that it's not actually reaching to its maximum height right now. It's a little bit lower, and if it were its maximum height, it would look like that. So for a variety of features, we have these options here. I could right click in this viewport and I can grab things and it will drop them right where I right clicked. Or I can grab them from the side here and I can do something like, say, aperture. I can drag and drop and it will do a smart connect if I do that. So automatically connecting to this. If I also desire, I can grab something and I can hit tab, and let's say I want, how about recurve? I'll click on that and it'll create the recurve node, and then I'll have to connect that. So that's an option. If I press F, it will pin this node, which means when I switch to other nodes, it'll show me the interface for them, but it won't switch to that view in the viewport, meaning that any changes I make to these will be previewed through this result instead. So this can be done for any one in the chain that you want. So if I just press F here again, I can go here and press F, and now when I switch to this one, you won't see that. Unfortunately, any changes here won't be reflected in here because this is upwards in the chain. So this is a way of you basically previewing what's going to happen when you change this, how it's going to look in the final result. Additionally here, just like the tab, you can filter out things. So erosion, you can bring up your erosion stuff pretty quickly like that. We did finish with these, so you can middle mouse button and wheel to navigate through here, but you can also use this wonderful little magnifying glass, and this has a little panel that you can drag around and a magnification slider, which is pretty cool. And if we then switch through that, we get back to normal. And if I do something like this and click this next one will show you that you can basically frame everything really fast and quickly. So if you're working in a big graph or an area that you kind of just scrolled off the edge, or sometimes when you load files, they may load off the side here, you just click this and it will quickly frame that. Another option down here is your current workflow mode. So I'm set in graph, but I can switch to layers mode anytime that I like. So that's an option that you have there. Moving on to the build, if you want to build anything, you have to right click on your mesh and you have a series of options. So I have things like the rename, duplicate, refresh, all those things that we need when we're just kind of working in the graph. And that F key that I had before, there's a pin option, which is the same thing. You see it pins it. Oops. And there's of course a bypass to basically ignore that entirely and just kind of move on to the next node. But there's this save option. And so the save option basically says that when I do a build, it's going to save this. Now, one thing to be aware of when you want to do a build, you want to make sure there isn't any kind of floating unused nodes in here. That would include things like the old output nodes that are here. So floating nodes are kind of no-no-ish, I guess. And it'll say something about broken nodes or not connected nodes that it doesn't like. So if I want to save this out, it's going to do that. If I have another one here, I can also save that one, and that means it'll save it in this version, also saving it in that version, and I'll have both of them. This will go for color nodes and various other things as well. So any particular output that you want to save, it will save. In the case of things like Erosion, which have, again, more outputs, so if I go to Erosion here, for example, and make sure that's connected, and I click save on that one, what happens there is it also will try to output all 4 of these, where these just have a single output. So I just click on the build manager, and anything that I've added to it now shows up here. That build location that we discussed from the preferences is right here as the default, but you can also opt to go to where your file location is, so wherever you saved your original Tor file. Again, try and make sure that's a folder that you have full access to. By default, it's set to, of course, save a version of the Tor file, so the actual working file. And the reason for that, again, is if there's any issues during build, power outage, or a crash, or anything like that, you will have that saved version that you can go back to. So sometimes we forget, we get so caught up in working that we don't remember to save stuff, and this is going to save you in that case. You can, of course, choose through a variety of other 32-bit file formats. Other than OpenEXR, if you don't have anything to load that, there's other features there. And then you have your resolution that you can set, which was preset over here, but you can change it to whatever you want. Click Start Build, and it will go ahead and build those out, and you'll see a progress menu that will tell you how everything is progressing along. Once you're done that, you can simply click on this button, which will take you, it says Build Stack, but really it is just opening the folder in which you've been building to. So when you click this button, it just opens that folder really quickly, so you have quick access to the files that have been built, check on them, see what's going on. So I believe that's it for this overall interface. I've covered pretty much all of the features I could think of for the moment. The only other thing is moving over to Erosion Studio, which comes with this feature, and it's much the same interface. In fact, it pretty much is the same interface. And Erosion Studio is where you want to load in your information. So you've got an orthographic view here. We've got our preferences. Obviously, it doesn't have as many preferences as the other ones. If I want to import, I can go ahead and import an image in here. I have no project loaded right now. We have the open, save. We have the save as recent images that are there, re-import and reconstruct based on an image. If you save over it, you've got your license and preferences there, etc. So save incremental. Then we have the brush size, the duration, strength, rock softness, all these features that you need for Erosion Studio brushes individually. Clicking and holding on these will bring up the different brushes that you can use. Basic is primarily handling taking away and adding soil as the basic setting, and then there's just soil, there's scratch, pockmarks, which add a certain amount of roughness to the soil. We have the cutter features, which cut fairly large grooves and stuff like that through your terrain. There's a number of these. Some will add a little bit of sand flow, others will not. Then we have the wide flow 2, and rough flow, which again are going to carve into the surface. So I recommend playing with these to see them, and so you just kind of click which tool that you want, and if it's not the one that you want, you can click and hold and find the one that you want underneath. Then we have some other features which are kind of crawling off the edge here. Let's see if I can pull this open. So we have normal, infinite, and erosive. And so normal will add and remove at the same time. Infinite will add more of the soil, and erosive will not add any soil at all. So that's those features. Again, we have the materials, the light, and the water that you can use in that particular case. So it's a cool additional feature. It replaces the directed erosion within the interface. It allows an exclusive interface to be used to handle that. So that's it for Gaea version 6000. Hopefully this has been useful to you, and I'll see you in the next video.